Hello everyone, and welcome to Dutch Greybeard. In between January 18 and 28, I read A Song for Arbonne by Guy Gavriel Kay. It is the fifth book I have read by this author. This was a buddy read I did together with my good friend BJ Minton. Like our previous buddy reads, this was a great experience. It is so much fun to interact with a fellow reader, even if he is on the other side of the world. BJ went off to a speedy start, but at the end I finished reading the book first. BJ reads at least 7 books simultaneously, whereas I was reading only 3 at the time. We mailed our impressions of the book every time we felt like it. It is so much fun to find that each of us notices things the other had missed or wasn't paying very much attention to. Next to our personal observations, I want to give some background regarding the historical setting Kay has chosen for this book. This is the Troubadour culture, which is so important to the story, but I also want to highlight some of the extreme cruelties the Church has committed to the people of Provence and Languedoc in the south of France during the Middle Ages. This video will be spoiler-free. I am reading Guy Gavriel Kay's entire works in their publication order. Earlier I read his Fionavar Tapestry trilogy and Tigana. That one was my book of the year of 2023. Before going into my and BJ's observations, let me tell you what this book is about. In the land of Arbonne, which is reminiscent of medieval Provence and Languedoc, arts like music and poetry are highly revered. The matriarchal society has a deep veneration for the goddess Ryan, who embodies love and beauty. In the prologue, the young Bertrand, Duke of Thaler, abducts his mistress Élise in a mock attack. She is married to Urte, the Duke of Miraval. This forbidden love and its dramatic consequences form the basis of a long-standing feud between both dukes. Political intrigue, cultural and religious differences lead to conflict with Gouraud, the country north of Arbonne. Against a diverse background, we follow Blaise, a mercenary. His history and personal quest are gradually revealed as he learns to appreciate the Arbonnese way of life. In the apotheosis of this beautiful story, all comes together in an extremely satisfying way. Right after reading the first chapter, BJ wrote that the prose is so beautiful that concentrating on that aspect of the book may interrupt the flow of the story. After mentioning that his knowledge of troubadours in history is next to zero, I shared with him what I knew about this topic. During my study, I learned about these literary poets who were among the first to write about worldly matters. They did this in languages other than Latin, which was the official language for writing at the time. My professor was so enthralled with troubadours that he regularly burst out into singing one of their songs. His enthusiasm for this old culture was highly contagious. The troubadours, a combination of a poet and a musician, originate from the south of France. The first known troubadour lived in the 11th century. They wrote mainly about courtly love. There were also several noblemen who tried their hand at being a minstrel. The courts in those days were keen to have troubadours on their staff, which was a sign of sophistication and importance. One of their subgenres is called the alba. In these songs, the watcher who serves the lady announces the sunrise, signaling the lady and her lover to end their lovemaking and part ways if they don't want to be caught by her husband, usually the lord or the king. One of the most beautiful watcher melodies I know is sung in the opera Tristan und Isolde by Richard Wagner, my favorite opera of all time. Like BJ, the prose positively amazed me as well. Just 2 examples of those first pages of the book. Your mother's laughter is the strongest army I will ever have in Arbonne. Élise de Miraval, daughter of the Count of Arbonne, smiled then, the ancient smile of the goddess, of women centered in their own mysteries. As mentioned, the land of Arbonne in GGK's book resembles in many ways the Provence and Languedoc area in France. If you were to place a map of France over the map in GGK's book, both countries are more or less situated in the same area. Also, the Languedoc, where they nowadays still speak Occitan, or Occitan, I don't know how you pronounce it, literally the language of Oc, has always rebelled against outsiders telling them what to believe or how to live their lives. The so-called Cathars or Albigenses come from this region. Their beliefs were very different from what the Catholic Church imposed on people, and for this they were branded as heretics. They were persecuted and massacred during the 12th, 13th and 14th century. There were many low points, but one of them occurred in July of 1209, when a Crusader army besieged the city of Béziers. When army officers asked how they could tell Cathars from Catholics, one of the clerics in charge is supposed to have said, "Kill them all. The Lord will recognize his own." Another low point took place 30 years later, when on a Friday the 13th, 183 men and women were burned at the stake. This is the origin of our ominous superstition for Friday the 13th. A lot of this history resonates in A Song for Arbonne. The Arbonnese are ruled by a woman, Signée de Barbetin, and they worship Ryan, a goddess. Also, burning people is the preferred method of execution in Goho. Arranged marriage was common practice in noble circles from the early Middle Ages going forward. Women and young girls of nobility were married off without having any say in the matter. No wonder there must have been a drive towards true love. This historical background plays a major role in GGK's stories, which in essence can be seen as an interpretation about the subjection of women. In Arbonne, the troubadours give words and voice to the need for true love. In truth, the most beautiful love poetry originates from these early minstrels. Even the birds above the lake sing of my love. The first 100 to 150 pages of the book are very slow. There is no real main protagonist or antagonist. Several characters just inhabit the pages, with nothing much of importance happening, or so it seems. The reader is kept in the dark as to what the real story is about. After having read the Empire trilogy and the Ark of a Scythe trilogy, which were quick reads, I now found myself scanning the page numbers again while reading, to see if I was making any progress. The story certainly holds promise, but there is not much direction to speak of yet. Nevertheless, the prose is simply magical. GGK can paint a background or life experience in just a few words. Signe de Barbetin, Countess of Arbonne, stood at her bedchamber window, and the two other women in the room with her preparing to attend to her needs were far too young, both of them, to have even a hope of understanding the smile that crossed her face. Beautiful. I noticed how each chapter or paragraph that takes place at the barbaric court of King Adhemar in Goro is set in present time. The rest of the book is set in the past tense, but only these scenes seem to take place in the present time. Until the end of the book, I couldn't figure out why the author would do that. Perhaps any of you have an idea. It seems such a needless change in the way to narrate the story. It's not distracting or bothersome in any way, I just wonder about its function. At the end of part 1, I was still sort of waiting for the story to truly kick in, but I enjoyed my reading time. Like BJ, I got more into the story with part 2, and the pickup ability increased. This book began to overwhelm me because it touched upon my personal life in so many ways, with regard to music, performing, and my long-time interest in the Middle Ages. The singer, Liseuse, is definitely one of my favorite characters. She seems such a naive and innocent young woman, and so unbelievably honest and straightforward. It shows trust in people, which must have been a rare thing in those hazardous times. Just before she performs at an inn, what she realizes, as she always did before she sang, a fleeting awareness, but real as the stones of a wall, was that moments like this, with music about to follow, were why she lived, what made her feel most truly alive. This is what I love about Kay's writing. In just a few words, he's able to capture a feeling rich in experience and authenticity. In my younger days, I did some performing as a singer and actor. This never amounted to very much, but I immediately recognized this description, an instance, fleeting, but there, that you are aware that what you're about to do of your being. I experience this all the time with Kay, even when he's writing about experiences I myself have never had. But when he describes them, it is as if I've experienced them, somehow. It's a rare gift. While turning pages, the book continued to get better and better. From a relatively low pickup ability in the beginning of about 65%, it had improved to 90% when I read part 3. Blaise, who up until this point hasn't gotten over his infatuation for his former lover, Luciana De Longhi, spends the night with another woman. For when Luciana De Longhi had used love and love-making as instruments, weapons in subtle, intricately devised campaigns, a pursuit of pleasure and power through binding men's spirits helplessly to her, Blaise was given a gift that night in Tavernelle of a strong soul's love-making, without eluding, fierce as wind, with grace yet at the heart of it, and needs of her own, offered honestly and without holding back. This quote is a good example of Kay's masterful prose. The words implicitly explain the difference between two women and two worlds. The needs of her own tell us that this woman's lovemaking is authentic, without hidden agenda. Kay is one of the best word illustrators of love scenes, when trust and desire came together. It is respectful, without the intent of arousing the reader, but with a keen eye for the intense beauty of it all. Another example of his writing skill, which almost makes me envious. He was surrounded by quicksilver people whose minds leapt effortlessly down channels he found perilously dark. Like many times, there is way too much to quote, so, as usual, I will restrict myself. But this next one is important. In the male-dominated country of Gorho, only newborn sons are regarded as worthy. The pregnant lady in the quote, whose name I leave out for spoiler reasons, is royalty. She fled her country and took refuge in Arbonne. The Corans in the quote are mercenaries or soldiers. He was almost certainly hoping her child would be a girl. For a girl, the Korans of Gorho were far less likely to be unleashed upon them. Here the worthlessness, so-called worthlessness of a baby girl, suddenly has become very valuable. She is worth peace. I love that twist. One of the most beautiful scenes is when an old musician, called a juggler, with full attention for detail, prepares for his performance. The lute looked to be as old as he was, but the sound, even in the tuning, was achingly pure. The word achingly is what sets a writer like Kay apart from many others. Perhaps my love for troubadours has something to do with my last name, which is spelled as L-U-T, and in English it would be pronounced as lute. and the lute was the instruments troubadours used to accompany themselves while singing their songs. Around this point, B.J. writes that this is a beautiful work and that Kay's talent is truly a gift. He also regards the performance of the elderly juggler as one of his favorite scenes. In real life, B.J. had been rehearsing with a handbell choir, and after returning home from communing with angels, while reading that section, I realized that tears were rolling down my cheeks. Kay so perfectly described this gifted performance. As a performer, true perfection is an out-of-body type experience. It is a very rare occurrence. For me, crying while reading practically never happens. In the middle of the building up to a duel to the death between two men, G.G.K. writes a short interlude with Liseux. This is a good example of how he paces the story. It also holds one of the most beautiful lines. When Liseux, who has a crush on one of the fighters, realizes, with a cold dawning of despair, that her heart was gone from her. It had left without her knowing, like a bird in winter flying north to a hopelessly wrong destination, where no haven of warmth or welcome could even be imagined. Not her heart belonged to him, but her heart was gone from her. And the metaphor of the bird flying in the entirely wrong direction is perfectly illustrative of Liseux's lostness. Part 3 ends with the performance of a poem in which Fionavar is mentioned. I believe this somehow refers to Fionavar, the world of G.G.K's first trilogy, which there is called The First World. I have no idea how this book relates to that trilogy. If any of you know, please let me know in the comments. The book contains many very strong and sharp dialogues. When someone is called out for blindly following and aiding his leader who burned people at stakes, he claims that he had no other choice. The other person then replies, "Not so. We can say no and die. It is a choice. In the face of some things asked of us, it is the only choice." Another strong dialogue. On the eve of a great battle, Bertrand and Urte, the two feuding dukes, have a huge falling out. Their quarrel is worth quoting, but I will limit myself to how Signe, the Countess of Arbonne, reacts. "Have you ever thought how like children the both of you are? It's an old story. Let it rest. Let Elise lie in her grave. I will not let Arbonne lie buried in that same grave, or be trapped in the maze you two have shaped for each other from that history. It is over. It must be over." Arbonne is the only country where women are truly held in high esteem. A woman leads the country, and their main god is a goddess, Ryan. The land of Goho is the exact opposite. In a conversation between Liseux and Rinette, a priestess of Ryan, the latter says that the people from Goho are actually not really so different from us. They are badly taught, that is all. Think of how much of the mystery and the power of life they have lost by denying Ryan. This is so essential. It puts all subjection and oppression in the right perspective. People who subject or oppress women or other groups are badly taught. And yes, much of the mystery and power of life comes from women. It is one's own loss who denies this truth. In an emotional scene in this book, one of the characters whispers with his dying breath to his wife, "I have no right to ask for anything." "I know you do not," she agreed quietly, adhering even at the last to her own inner laws. "But I have the right to grant what I wish." So strong and so beautiful. The ending of this book is simply perfect. Everything, the big threads as well as all the loose threads, comes together. From the 5 books I now have read by this author, I dare to conclude that Guy Gavriel Kay does not write easy books. They require concentration, especially if you want to savor all the elements, the poetic prose, the immaculate world building, the character development, and the profound story. With A Song for Arbonne, the author has written a monument in words, honoring the ancient troubadour tradition. It is also a tribute to the courageous drive for an autonomous way of life, in memory of the so-called Cathars in the south of France. And it is a canticle for the feminine, positive power of life. During my read of A Song for Arbonne, I have cried. I was angry, even furious at times. I laughed out loud. I was touched by beautiful rituals and poetry, and I could feel the love some of the characters feel for one another. I gave this book 100 points out of 100. This is the first time I give the highest possible score since beginning this journey into fantasy. In short, this is a perfect book for me. It is the best fantasy book I have ever read. Guy Gavriel Kay is well on its way to becoming one of my favorite writers of all time. Thank you very much for watching this video. Until we meet again at Dutch Greybeard.